Hello, and thank you for joining me. My name is Janie DeTota, and I am representing my group, Haley Gilmore, Cammy Willis, Kimberly Moore, and Mark Farmer. We have put together a PowerPoint presentation for communication and conflict resolution. Communication. What is it? It is the exchange of thoughts, messages, or information by speech, signals, writing, or behavior. We are communicating all the time, whether you know it or not. You're texting, you're on social media platforms, you're reading a book. The book is written communication to you. You're writing a check to pay your bill. That's a form of communication. You're communicating the information that you want them to receive on the check. We write our flashcards. We read our books. We calculate. We communicate all the time. And communication is said to have at least one sender, one receiver, and a message. Communication begins the moment that two or more people become aware of each other's presence. It is verbal and it can be nonverbal. I personally am very verbal, but I'm also very nonverbal too because I use my body a lot, and that is nonverbal communication. Um, Communication also has two climates that every nurse needs to remember and be aware of because it is so important when we are conveying our messages, and that is internal climate and external climate. The internal climate includes values like feelings, temperament, stress level of the sender, and stress level of the receiver. External climate includes things like the weather, temperature, timing, status, power, authority, and the organizational climate itself. So, all of us that are in this nursing program are hopefully going to be graduating with our BSN soon. And as we become expert nurses and move out of our novice nursing role, we are going to come into leadership and management. And communication is going to be a huge part of what we do in our leadership and management positions. And we're going to have people who are below us and people who are above us that we're going to need to communicate things that they're sending to each other. And we need to do that effectively and timely and efficiently. And when we do the communication, we really need to remember that both the sender and the receiver must be sensitive to the internal and external climate because perception of the message is altered greatly depending upon the climate that exists at the time the message was sent or received. And notice that this internal and external climate that we're talking about is on the sender side and the receiver side because we have to remember communication is not always just going to be written. It's not always going to be verbal. It's not always just going to be nonverbal. Sometimes we have verbal communication along with our nonverbal communication, which is our body language. So just because I say no doesn't always mean that I mean no. It's going to depend on the climate of the situation. No is not the same as no. And yes is not the same as yes. And yeah is not the same as yes. So we really need to be aware of how we're communicating, what we're communicating, and be aware of those internal and external climates. So let's talk about communication for nurse leaders and nurse managers. Some of the roles that a nurse manager is going to come across is, and some of the skills that they need to know, and some of the things that they need to be aware of is they need to understand and they need to appropriately use the communication network that the organization prefers. Example, if your organization does not want you to use social media or social platforms to communicate with people outside of your organization, then I would not do that. Um, Also, you need to be aware of how they want you to communicate formally and informally. An example would be that, my husband, he owns a business. He does not allow his employees to call him and leave him voice messages. He prefers that they text him. That's like documentation for him. And he prefers emails over any other form of communication. He just feels like that is more reliable source of documentation. Just know if your organization will allow social networking in regards to work and organization. Communicate clearly and precisely in a language that others understand. Appropriately observe and interpret the verbal and nonverbal communication of followers. Recognize status, power, and authority as barrier to management. Subordinate communication and use communication strategies to overcome these barriers. Role model the use of social networking principles that promote collaboration, shared decision making, and while protecting the patient's rights and confidentiality. Some more roles that a nurse leader or a nurse manager is going to face is that they are going to determine the appropriate communication mode or combination of modes for optimal distribution of information in the organization's hierarchy. Basically, what I take from this is that, you know, you might need to say something that's super, super important. And if you need to send something out that's something super, super important, you need to do that in a mode that is really going to get their attention and something that they're going to take serious. So you wouldn't put it on a flyer, you wouldn't text it, you wouldn't send it in group communication. You would maybe write a letter, put it in an envelope, make it look really important, make it look really official, or schedule interpersonal communication one-on-one to let them know something. If it's something that's not important, don't send it in a letter, don't send it through an email. Just put it on a bulletin board. It's generic information. Maybe you're having a chili cook-off. Some people may want to do it, some people may not. Bulletin board is probably fine for that particular information. So, make sure that you're using the organizational hierarchy to get your communication across effectively and efficiently. Perhaps written communications that are clear, I'm sorry, not perhaps, prepares written communications that are clear and uses language that is appropriate for the message and the receiver. Differentiates between information and communication and appropriately assesses the need for subordinates to have both. Establish a technology-enabled communication infrastructure that leverages the benefits of social media while minimizing the risk. But with that one being said, remember, some organizations may not want you to use social media at all. So that is your job to know whether or not you should, and then it is your job to abide by those rules too and set a role model example to your subordinates. And use knowledge of group dynamics for attaining goals and maximizing organizational communication. One of the ways that I can think, what comes to mind is that maybe you want your team to have 1 month of no errors. Then, you could have like a team meeting, set that goal, and then also, be really creative and tell them that whoever participates in this and whatever team wins this, maybe we're going to have like some type of incentive. So now that we know what communication is, we need to know that as we move from the novice nurse to the expert nurse and move into our roles as nurse leaders and managers, who we are going to be communicating and what are we going to be communicating. We are going to be communicating to the organization itself, clients, colleagues, superiors, subordinates. In other words, we're going to be communicating with the clients, which we know also involves their family. Maybe it involves other caregivers that are playing that role in that patient's life. We may need to communicate with people who we refer the patient to or people who refer the patient to us, just depending on where you work as a nurse. And then also you will be communicating with maybe the insurance companies, maybe the people who make policies, maybe you're communicating with the pharmacy. You're going to do a lot of communicating, and you're going to communicate things like organizational information, interpersonal information, group information. You're going to do a lot of communication about information that's going to be very important. So again, you want to make sure that when you are communicating with whoever you're communicating, that your communication is effective and that it is timely and that it is efficient. And because you're going to be doing a lot of communication, communication is so important for nurses. Effective communication is so important. Communication among nurses and staff is priority for patient health and safety. Communication must be timely, effective, and efficient. Communication is extremely consequential in healthcare because, you know, if you have poor communication in healthcare, you put your patients at the potential to die. You have the potential to lose lives because of poor communication. The Joint Commission in 2016 found that 65% of sentinel events were the result of communication problems, making communication a key source of error. So far, we have discussed what communication is. We have discussed that communication is verbal or nonverbal. We have discussed that there are climates that everyone should be sensitive to when it comes to communication. So we've also discussed what a nurse will communicate and who a nurse will communicate with and how they should handle that communication as far as what mode. Now, what we would like to discuss is strategies that a nurse can use for effective, timely communication. And one of the things that we've already talked about, but I do want to reiterate, is understand organization structure. Also, by doing that, you are acknowledging how the organization likes to communicate. Recognize who will be affected by the communication. How does this affect your team in a positive way or a negative way? And that may actually determine how you send that communication out. Team care plans, education, SBARs, huddles, face-to-face handoffs at shift change, routine observations, that's your appraisals, when you give your raises, when you try to coach them into becoming better employees, interpersonal meetings, emails, text. Maybe you can text within your team, or maybe the team uses text while you're on the shift to communicate to find out where each other are. Maintain professional communication when you're texting. Just FYI, that could, come back to get you if you're not professional on those phones when you're texting. Acknowledge employees' accomplishments, seek feedback from the receiver about your communication, and do not overwhelm people with information. I used to work with someone who would send an email every day, just with all kinds of information, and it's just so overwhelming that you just shut down and you don't even want to read your email anymore. So you don't want to get to that point. Don't send emails consecutively. Use those other modes. Maybe you can do the flyer. Maybe you can text. Maybe you can do the bulletin board. Maybe you can, break the information up and deal it out in a way that they can handle it and not be overwhelmed. Conflict resolution. Conflict occurs as a result of differences in ideas, values, or beliefs of two or more people. Conflict is natural, neither negative or positive. Characteristics of conflict: normal, inevitable, predictable, occur naturally, and can be expected. Conflict resolution is a way for two or more parties to find a peaceful resolution to a disagreement. Conflict resolution. Nurse leaders and managers will be involved in conflict resolution. And to handle situations of conflict, the nurse manager must have the skills to help effectively resolve them. The nurse manager must approach this challenge thoughtfully, and the nurse manager must handle conflicts in an efficient and effective manner, resulting in improved quality, improved patient safety, and improved staff morale, and limit work stress for the caregiver. I like this little cartoon. Thanks for the communication, Dr. Howe. No problem, Nurse Sally. I'm glad we are able to resolve the conflict. Communication and conflict, they go hand in hand. They really do, because oftentimes communication, can lead to conflict, and the way that you resolve conflict is with communication. Okay, so let's talk about conflict resolution in regards to safety. Nurse managers can no longer afford to respond to conflict traditionally. An example, to avoid or suppress conflict, because this is non-productive. The American Association of Critical Care Nurses Standards for Healthy Work Environment recognize the importance of proficiency in communication skills. And when they recognize this, the Joint Commission, they revised their leadership standards to place a mandate on healthcare leadership to manage disruptive behavior that can impact patient safety. So there's no sweeping things under the rug and hiding it or trying to just avoid conflict by not making the communication that you need. Sometimes people try to avoid that so that they don't have to communicate with people because we just don't want to sometimes. But because it is such a big deal that communication does cause error in patient safety, we have to, by the Joint Commission's law, we have to have conflict resolution. We have to really look at this, recognize it, and take care of it. And knowing that not everyone likes to engage in conflict resolution, I know some people like to manage, but they do not like to address people. They really just do not like to get involved when there's conflict. We've come up with some strategies that a nurse leader or a nurse manager can use. Strategies are engage in dialogue, engage in coaching, identify problems in advance, potential conflicts that you see coming, like maybe you scheduled someone to work on a holiday, you know that they're not going to like that, but you have to anyway before they see the schedule. Maybe you can kind of get to them, explain why you had to. That would be identifying potential conflicts. Provide education and training. These strategies are meant to enhance patient safety. The nurse manager also needs to be purposeful and thoughtful when they're engaging in conflict resolution, as it directly relates to patient safety and patient outcomes. Engage in dialogue. We have quite a few bulletins in regards to engaging in dialogue. I'm not going to read all of them to you, but I do want to say by engaging in dialogue, the point and purpose is that you want to allow for open communication, and you want them to know that their opinion and their standpoint is important. You may want to do some role playing. You may want to facilitate how to select different ways of engaging in dialogue to maintain rapport with your staff. Engage in coaching. Coach, coach, coach. Engage in coaching, because engaging in coaching, it really can show that you can minimize escalating conflicts by educating nurses to learn how to effectively resolve them themselves. This can be accomplished through case scenarios and working with the education department at your organization on role-playing exercises. Managers, they usually arrive at the dispute after it's already started or after it's already happened. So do remember that there's two sides to every story, and have a clear understanding of the issue before you start to communicate to either party. And having the nurse leader walk the direct care nurse through a variety of conversations to resolve a dispute or disagreement provides the opportunity for alternative resolutions to be considered. Identify potential conflicts. This is so important. The Joint Commission recommends that organizations need to establish policy and guidelines to facilitate, collaborate, practice, encourage interprofessional communications across disciplines as a proactive measure to address conflicts. Yes, addressing conflicts in advance can be really helpful if you know how a patient may react, or if you see that something is going on that you can prevent from happening, or if you can resolve it in advance, then you could really prevent a full-on conflict from transpiring. So therefore, you are having a resolution to conflict. Education and training. I can't speak enough about this. Nurses need to be educated on the topic of conflict and conflict management strategies to address and effectively resolve conflict. Learning conflict management strategy empowers nurses to resolve conflict early and influence the work environment in which they deliver patient care. The training shouldn't be limited to the handling of interpersonal conflicts. It should include all types of conflict commonly encountered in the healthcare setting. So we have talked about communication and conflict resolution, what it is, how a nurse is going to use it, what it means to a nurse, and we have given you some strategies to allow you to have effective communication and effective conflict resolution. Just remember that the two go hand in hand. They impact nursing care and delivery of care. The communication and conflict resolution, it really does affect patient outcomes. Communicating effectively will prevent conflict, and conflict resolution is managed with effective communication. Nurses must be competent in the skills of communication and conflict resolution. Competency leads to patient safety and improved patient outcomes. Thank you for joining me for this PowerPoint presentation. We hope that you have learned a lot, and we hope that you remember this and that it helps you in your future. Good luck.